Welcome to the Plant-Based Podcast. Did you know that plants are truly amazing? Not only can you grow them and eat them, you can also wear them, drink them, nourish your skin with them, and so much more. Let Ellen and Michael inspire you to love plants as much as they do, as they chat with the movers and shakers in this wonderful plant-based world. So, let's dig in.
The tranquil, soothing, natural sound of flowing water. Listening to it has been shown to lower your heart rate and blood pressure and generally relax your whole body. Combining the magical sound of cascading water with the beauty of plants, Hydria Life will now enable you to use those same health and well-being effects at home or in the garden. Get 10% off their rechargeable Hydria fountain at hydrialife.com. All you need to do is quote the code PLANT24 when ordering.
So today on the podcast, we have a very special guest as we delve into the dark history of sugar. We have Dr. Neil Buttery with us, who indeed wrote a book entitled The Dark History of Sugar. He's an award-winning author, podcaster, and cook of British food from the past. And his specialist subject is, hooray, can we have a drum roll, please? Puddings! My favourite one, Neil. Welcome to the podcast, Neil.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
Oh, no worries. Good to have you here. I randomly attended a talk on Zoom that I saw advertised on Instagram, and I think this was a few months ago, and it was your talk about the dark history of sugar, and I found it so interesting that I badgered Ellen and I said, we have to get this guy on the podcast. So that is why you're here today. So thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule.
Oh, thanks for tuning in.
Oh, no.
That will do.
Showing my age, that phrase, isn't it?
So tell us about yourself just in a nutshell and how you got into food history and what your day job is right now as well.
Well, it's a good question. Well, I am a doctor, but I'm not a doctor of anything to do with food or with history.
Okay.
I'd been a teacher for a few years, science teacher, and I decided to go back to university to study evolutionary biology. And I got on a PhD course for that. And I was terrified of having to write. You know, that fear of the sort of flashing cursor in the top corner of the screen. The cold sweats and all that kind of stuff. So I thought, I need to practice writing, and it has to be something that's got nothing to do with the PhD because I want it to be fun. So I started cooking British food, writing about it, because I didn't know anything about it. I was much more interested in cooking Asian food and Italian food. For some reason, those are the two that I sort of picked and really got involved with. So I thought, let's do something where I'm going to learn.
Not famous for being enjoyed, is it? Or maybe we'll learn something more in this next hour.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess my repertoire was the same as everybody else's. Sunday dinner, shepherd's pie every now and again, that sort of stuff. And I don't think I appreciated British food. So I started cooking every recipe in Jane Grigson's book, English Food, from the 70s. And, well, I haven't stopped since, really. I ended up doing a second blog. And then my work in science took me to America. And I was cooking my American friends things like jam roly-poly puddings and, all that sort of stuff they'd never heard of.
What did they make of British food?
Yeah.
Well, they really liked it. And that's when the penny dropped, really. Because without realizing, Jane Grigson had taught me a load of history about food and all these traditional techniques. And people liked them. People who didn't even have the sort of associated memories that we do really liked them. So I resigned from my job as a scientist in America, moved back to England. And 10 days after I moved back, I did my first kind of little artisan market stall locally.
Wow.
And that became a pop-up restaurant that I did at home, and then an actual restaurant. But all the time I've been researching and writing. So being a chef and being a writer are very much sort of the same thing. They happened in parallel with me. And these days, I just happened really to be going down the route of doing writing and research and talks and outreach and things like that. But there's been no plan.
No,
Sometimes the plan is no plan.
Yeah.
That's the best way to go sometimes, right?
But before we move on, what foods were you doing on your artisan food stall? And like, it was all the traditional English stuff.
Yeah, it was a mix of stuff that everybody had heard of. So sticky toffee pudding.
Okay,
that sort of stuff.
But to a traditional recipe, I guess.
Traditional recipes, yeah. So I found the original sticky toffee pudding recipe, not just, some random one. I discovered, or rediscovered really, I suppose, these amazing foods and combinations of ingredients that we'd forgotten about, like steak and oyster pudding.
Oh, wow. Steak and oyster.
Really big in the Victorian era.
Oh.
If you could afford it, you'd put some mushrooms in. Whereas now, of course, you put mushrooms in, and if you can afford it, you put some oysters in.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So I rediscovered all these things. I just thought, right, well, I need to spread the good word. So sort of 3/4 of it was stuff that you'd heard of. Sticky toffee pudding, spotted dick, that kind of stuff. And then I put a little bit of the sort of weird, seemingly weirder stuff in. And then people got to trust me and my cooking. And before I knew it, I'm doing little pop-up restaurants where every course is has offal in it, for example, nose to tail foods. So I'm really glad that I've managed to hoodwink people into trying all of these foods. It turns out that it's all good food. Oh, well, 99 times out of 100, it's good food anyway. Sometimes you get the odd weird one where you just think, not sure what people enjoyed about that.
I love a pudding, honestly. I'm a definite pudding girl.
I'm not really a sweet tooth.
Yeah,
no.
I'm definitely a sweet tooth.
I would try the steak and oyster, even though it sounds weird. I would
never have that, but I would have sticky toffee pudding like for breakfast, lunch, and dinner if I could.
No, I'm the same.
Before we get into sugar a bit more, I think, you've obviously gone back to the traditional recipes. So it'd be quite interesting to hear, what you've discovered about people's eating habits and how in the UK that's changed throughout the decades, and also does that relate to the Grow Your Own movement at all?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. I suppose the short answer is yes, eating habits have really changed dramatically over the centuries and drastically in the last few years. I mean, there's always a bit of wobble up and down, of course. And I think at the moment we've begun to diverge into two different groups. One where people are, I guess you could use the word woke in this in this context, because people have awoken to the fact that we need to eat a lot of whole foods and live fermented foods, which a lot of people sort of view with a bit of suspicion. And quite rightly, because, people don't like change. People don't like things that are different. I'm certainly not having a go at those people who do, but there's those people who kind of realize that we need to get back to basic cooking done well. And it's great in the world today because you can choose ingredients from all around the world. It's not like you've just got onions and a bag of flour or something we would have done 250 years ago. Us common peasants, anyway. And then you got the other people who are sort of hooked without realizing it, on ultra processed food. And I mean, I think I hop between the two. I mean, the downside of loving puddings is that you do have too much sugar and you have too much white flour. White flour is an ultra processed ingredient. We're so familiar with it and so used to eating it that we forget that the idea of an ultra processed food is an ancient one. People were making white flour in ancient Egypt. So it's a deep-rooted part of the whole world's food culture, I think, or most of the world's food culture.
But do you feel that people were maybe growing their own fruit and vegetables more years ago, or have you seen a return to that in recent years? And also, I guess, added to that, are they now growing different things as well? Like there's some really old-fashioned vegetables like salsify, you know, that one that's supposed to taste of oyster.
Yes.
Zonera as well, that black one with the white inside.
The long black
so
root,
what sort of changes have you seen with kind of what people would bring to the table from their own garden? Just to kind of look back.
Going back to sort of medieval and early modern times, like Tudors and Stuarts, you had your regular people. If they weren't living in a city or a large town, they will have been growing their own. And there was a lot of stigma attached to herbs and vegetables. It was considered poor person's, peasants' food. So the upper classes, were not eating that much of it. They might have onions and herbs to season their food, but they weren't eating very much at all. And they were getting, scurvy and stuff with rich people, but it was very much viewed as like, you got to scrabble around for these leaves in the ground. That's peasants' nonsense. Whereas your peasants, who were obviously not getting enough calories, but they were getting a whole suite of vitamins and minerals that rich people weren't getting. But we're an aspirational country. So we wanted, when I say we, I know that I would have been a peasant.
Yeah,
you two probably would have been.
Totally with you.
So we would have been wanting all of this big eating, lots of meat, and to ditch this, poor person's food. We don't want to eat that. So what we've got today, fast forward, is a complete swap, because now it's cheap to eat big. It's cheap to eat refined foods. Yeah. They're not really that refined anymore, and that's the meaning of the word anyway. And it's your rich people who are abstaining from food and going to the gym. And, it used to be that if you were a bit fat, that was considered a very desirable trait, because it showed you could afford to eat well, whereas now it's the other way around. So it's very strange. But you were talking about the variety of fruit and veg. The big interesting time for that, for you two guys, is the 18th century. Because that's when the agricultural revolution really got going. And there was a huge number of fruits, vegetables, herbs being grown in stately homes in particular, and in market gardens in cities and big towns. You look through books written around the time, because you can order, just like you order stuff from a nursery now, and there'd be, and I'm not exaggerating here, 24 different varieties of apricots, 20 different kinds of gooseberries. And Jane Grigson, she's done so much good research, God bless her, she's dearly missed, but she sat and worked this out, and she found that in the 18th century, people were growing 200 different kinds of vegetable.
Wow.
Going to a supermarket today, how many, even a big one, how many different types of vegetable are you going to see? Nowhere near that. No. I'm not sure I don't think I'd be able to name 50.
You know what? I want to jump in with something culturally there, because I got a Chinese friend who lives in Holland, and she is always shocked in the supermarkets at how little choice there is. Because I think in China, you've still got many different vegetables, many different fungi available. And so we have really limited the kind of range of things that we have here in Europe. That's the thing.
But
for sure.
Also, when you grow your own food, so I have an allotment and I can pick and choose what I grow, and I try different varieties. And then you go to the supermarket and think, is that all I can get? So I think when you grow your own food, you start to appreciate that there's so much more.
Yes.
That might not be commercially viable as a crop.
Exactly. We live in a capitalist world, probably the most capitalist country in our capitalist world. So the only way to make these profits from these tiny margins is to specialize in just a handful of different foods.
Yeah.
And, we lived in a world where there used to be common ground for us to have maybe a cow or a pig, a bit of patch of land, but all those lands were essentially taken away from us by landowners when we switched to a sort of being an industrialized country. Many people were forced to move into cities or towns, maybe a bit keep a pig, but probably not. So suddenly we were at the behest of all the other farmers and traders and whoever, just to supply us with food. And that's when we start to lose our connection and lose our variety.
Lose our variety, definitely. It's interesting. I'd love to talk about sugar now, though. Let's delve into it a little bit. What does it? I'm going to tell you a little story about this. After you've answered this question, I'm going to tell you a funny story about it. What plant does sugar come from exactly? You know, how is it harvested? Where does it come from?
Yeah,
Tell us a bit more.
many people probably don't realise.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a long story. Well, first of all, sugar comes from sugar cane. The sugar that we're usually talking about, anyway, the one you put in your tea or you're using to make a cake, that's sucrose, and it comes from a sugar cane, a species of grass, which originally grew in Eastern Asia, New Guinea, 8,000 BC. That's how far you got to go back for the first time it's been cultivated. By the New Guineans, and they selectively bred it to have a thinner skin, because it's like bamboo essentially. Yeah. So they bred it to have a thinner skin so they could gnaw on it as a bit of a snack. They were also growing yams, they were growing bananas. They were, millennia ahead of the rest of the world, really. So they were getting lots of carbs. They didn't need sugar as a carbohydrate source. It was just as a nice snack. So that's the origins. But then, well, you'll know more than me. If you do plant some bamboo in your garden, about 3 months later, it's taken over because it's basically an aggressive weed. Yeah. And sugar's the same. It moves onto the mainland, probably by people moving to and fro, maybe trading or maybe taking cuttings with them. And it crawls very slowly to India. And that's when the first time sugar's actually made as a product, where they're crushing sugarcane down to get juice, boiling it away to make ghee, which also goes by the name of jaggery, which you can still buy, and it's used a lot in Asian cuisine. Okay. And it all goes a bit quiet for a few centuries. And you got to go another sort of 1,000 years into the future to the 7th century, and you've got the medieval Islamic Empire, who've been writing all this stuff down. They sort of appear in the very earliest manuscripts that we can see anyway, they almost appear fully formed with their sugar industry. They've worked it all out, how to grow it, how to extract it, and how to boil away all the juice to get a final product. And they're making a pretty good whitish sugar anyway. That doesn't really change in quality for a good few centuries, sort of 500 or 600 years. So they were really good. So that's kind of where the not dark history of sugar sits. Then after that, it all goes a little bit awry.
Okay.
Once everyone realised that they could make a load of money off it, and we all love sugar.
Yeah.
Well, you see that when you get some white people involved,
yeah,
that's when it goes horribly wrong. Because you've got the Crusades in the 11th and 12th centuries. Various groups in medieval Europe want to claim back the Holy Land from the perceived enemy of the medieval Islamic Empire. They're just sat there. What? Well, people descend on them. And they want to take back Jerusalem, and they do, briefly. And they see all this sugar being produced. And that all starts going back to Europe. People start getting taste for it, and they pour a lot of money into it. They get kicked out, quite rightly, really, at the Holy Land. The Muslims get their house back, their homes back. Off they go with a flea in their ear, but at least they know how to make sugar. And they set to work growing sugar and creating these plantations. They didn't do it very efficiently, unlike the Muslims were doing. So what was happening was, they were just basically deforesting the whole of southern Europe to feed their furnaces, to sell their sugar. Because if you've got 7 kilos of sugarcane juice, you've got to boil away 5 kilos of water to get your final product. And each refinery used 3/4 of a ton of wood per day.
Wow.
So what they were doing is they were sort of moving west, because that's where they were deforesting. They couldn't go the other way because it was all deserts. So they were going further west, deforesting as they go. No alarm bells were ringing. No one was going, hang on a minute. We're going to run into a problem here. They just kept on going.
Wow.
Till they ended up having to start deforesting the Canary Islands and Madeira. And then they went on to Madeira and the Canary Islands. And there the whole thing should have stopped, really, because there wasn't enough wood. It was too expensive to import it. It should have just fizzled out. But then Columbus only went and found the New World, 1492. And then people went, great, we've got this whole infinite new world of forest that we can start cutting down. So they started cutting down the trees in Brazil, shipping them over to fire the furnaces, and then they moved the sugar plantations to Brazil. Columbus took them to the West Indies, and it kind of spread from there horribly. That's about 2,000 years of history there.
There's no conscience involved, is there?
I don't know if, I sometimes wonder if at the time they realised the impact that would have then, obviously, but also further on, down the road. Did they know, or did they just at that point in time think, oh, this does this, so we'll carry on doing it? Do you know what I mean? Did they know the impact? But
there must have also been an increasing demand for that product as well at that point. And what was driving that? What particular use for sugar was at that point?
Well, the first time you find sugar actually being found in Europe, the earliest example I could find was the 8th century, so well before any of that. The Venerable Bede, I don't know if you've heard that name, it was an Anglo-Saxon...
To me, anyway.
Not that kind of bead.
Sorry. Yeah.
He's like an Anglo-Saxon monk living in the very north of England. And when he died, he had a little pouch of spices, and in that pouch of spices was sugar. So it was coming to even the real kind of dreary end of England. But yeah, it's during the sort of late medieval where it really takes off. And it's because it's expensive, and it's only royals at first who were able to afford it and to have it. And you knew your place back in those days, so you weren't even allowed to go and have some sugar if you were kind of lower down in the ranks. But again, aspirational continent, and that starts to filter down. So there's that element of it, just for the fact that people just wanted to be like their betters in massive inverted commas. So that's a big pressure.
But just there, before we do move on a granular level, what were they using it for? To make cakes, or to use it in newly discovered tea, coffee drinks? How were they using it in the kitchen?
So 2 different ways. One, as a spice. So pinch here, pinch there.
Okay.
It really does make a difference. I mean, we don't have the taste buds because we're just trained now to taste sweetness because we have so much sugar in everything. Even people who reckon that they don't have much sugar compared to medieval Europe.
She had a cake at lunchtime.
I did.
That was her lunch, apparently.
I'm addicted. I admit it.
Yeah. But you see old descriptions of foods or recipes where people say, to make this sweet, add some violet flowers. To us, they wouldn't taste sweet. You might get the aroma, but they wouldn't be sweet. So adding little pinches here and there. Well, I mean, if you've ever made a ragu sauce, lots of sour tomatoes, it's amazing how much a pinch of sugar improves it. Yeah, so we still do use it as a spice today. So that's one way. And then the other way was to make sculptures. So they'd make things called sugar plate, where they'd sort of make sugar paste, they'd mix it with starch and things like that, pour it out. They'd colour it with different things. They'd pour it out to make panes, which they could cut out, or they'd make them pour them into moulds and make these amazing pieces of art called subtleties. Yeah. They'd be wheeled out sort of halfway through the meal, and everyone would look at it, and then it'd be wheeled back again.
So they couldn't eat it?
No, it's too expensive to eat.
Oh my God.
But
and that's what was leading to deforestation. Beautiful.
Yeah, just so Richard II or whatever obscure medieval king could have some ponies made out of sugar or whatever.
Jesus,
just ask you, we've been talking about sugar cane, but I'm from Norfolk and I live near a place called Cantley where there's a huge beet factory. So what's the difference between sugar cane and sugar beet?
Well, on a chemical level, there is no point. No point? I'm going to say that.
No point.
There's no point. On a chemical level, there's no difference at all. It's both sucrose. The benefits of it is much easier to extract and purify. Downside is actually you don't get any of the nice byproducts like molasses or golden syrup. But it is easy to make. It's grown in a temperate climate. And of course, there's fewer food miles. So if you do have the option to choose sugar beet over sugar cane, then go for the sugar beet, which is sold under the name, at least in the UK anyway, as silver spoon.
Yeah,
Okay,
of course, yeah. So sugar beet looks, very much like celeriac cross parsnip type thing. And when we had a field of them growing.
Is this your story?
Yeah, near near where we lived. And my mum, they used to harvest the field, and then there'd be some left over from the harvest, laying along the pathway. And my mum picked one up, which you're not meant to do, I might add. So naughty mum. But anyway, she picked it up and she brought it home thinking it was a parsnip, and she cooked it. And then she put it on the plate just like a parsnip. And I was eating and thinking, there's no way that this is a parsnip.
That serves her right for nicking crops.
Yeah. I was like, I'm afraid that's not a parsnip.
What did it taste like though? Because it's a beetroot, isn't it? It's related to beetroot.
It tasted like a root vegetable. Do you know what I mean? It tasted like a root, but it had an element of sweetness, but it didn't taste like parsnip.
There's things like yellow beet are actually quite sweet.
It didn't taste like sugar. Do you know what I mean? It didn't taste like that.
But yellow beets, sweet, and you've also got the kind of white ones as well, so it can't be too far away.
No, it was just like a root kind of vegetable, but it wasn't parsnip, and it did taste sweeter. Do you know what I mean? But just not it's not like you're eating a mouthful of sugar kind of thing.
Sorry, before we had sugar on tap, though, beetroot and parsnip were the two most common regular sources of sweetness that we had. I mean, of course, there was honey and things like that, of course, but when it came to just regular sweetness, parsnip and beetroot was the way to go. So it's maybe no surprise that we worked out a way of getting the sugar out of beets.
I'm very aware we've just taken you down two different routes. We've talked about sugar beet, we've talked about what was driving that sugar demand with the sugar canes, etc. But we were at the point where it's just starting to be cropped in the New World. So what happened next at that point?
So what you had was, you got two camps. You've got the Portuguese going down to South America and Brazil, and you got the Spanish at the helm, Christopher Columbus, going to the West Indies. He was actually Italian. It gets quite confusing for somebody who's not very good at geography like me. But it's 1493, his second voyage. That's the really important one because he returns with lots of colonists to, set up a new life in the New World. They go to Hispaniola, one of the larger islands in the West Indies, and they have a load of sugarcane cuttings there, or with them, and they intend to grow sugarcane immediately. His wife, or his lover rather, her father was a really big sugar baron on the Canary Islands, funding all of this. So it's pretty dark, the kind of people who are dealing in the business of sugar right from the get-go are, scoundrels and people with very, very few morals. The sugar doesn't really take off too well. They're too interested really in getting all the gold out of the gold mines because there's quite a lot of gold there. But after a while, people realize you can make actually more money from sugar than you can from gold. So they sort of switch over. And really, this is when the slavery begins, but not with the slavery of Africans, the slavery of the indigenous people. The Taino being the main group of people who are put to work, and it's just God love them. They're just worked to death essentially, and they're so susceptible to things like measles and smallpox and influenza, all these things that the Europeans are bringing over, and they're just dropping like flies. And they had no concept of land ownership. So Columbus turns up. This this just shows how Europeans think, differently to the rest of the people in the world.
Mm.
He turned up with a letter from the King of Spain telling them by this contract, that they didn't own their own land anymore. As far as they were concerned, it was legally binding.
Yeah.
And they're like, what are you talking about? No one can own the land. That's ridiculous. And it is ridiculous when you actually think about it. Like, who do we think we are?
Yeah, right.
But so all their gold's taken away from them, their families are broken up, it's pretty grim. And this is when it starts getting really sort of grim. I've got a quote here somewhere. Hang on a minute. Best pause.
It's super interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. I told you.
Here we go.
If someone puts a spoon of sugar in their in their tea or whatever, you think about where that's come from, and the history of it, is quite extraordinary.
Well, we've not had to think about it for several centuries, and that's how people get away with how they get away with it,
Yeah, true.
It's just in a nice paper bag. Doesn't that look nice?
Yeah.
That's all you think about, isn't it?
Yeah.
But going back to the enslaved peoples, their voices are very rarely captured because they couldn't write and they didn't speak English or Spanish. In fact, it's more relevant to them. But I did find one example, and I thought I would read it out to you because
please do. Yeah.
Every time I read it, it gives me goosebumps. There was a Taino slave called Hathaway. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce his name, but that's what I go with. And his words were captured by a sort of visiting do-gooder, actually. Unfortunately, it didn't come to much fruition, but somebody did try to do some good and sort of interview people. But this is the only existing quote I could find from somebody who'd been enslaved, those original slaves. And he's asked about what they think about the Spanish and how they've dealt essentially with the colonization. This is what he says. And he's talking about in the context of having the land taken away from him and their possessions taken away from them. He says, for these they fight and kill. For these they persecute us, and they tell us, these tyrants, that they adore a God of peace and equality, and yet they usurp our land and make us their slaves. They speak to us of an immortal soul and of their eternal rewards and punishments, and yet they rob our belongings, seduce our women, violate our daughters. Incapable to matching us in valour, these cowards cover themselves with iron that our weapons cannot break. Which I think sums it up, better than anybody else. And I'm a big proponent of using other people's words if I can, and it's much more powerful than anything I could have written, that's for sure. And every time I kind of feel goosebumps in my arms and I start getting a bit choked up, and I've talked about this so many times and the edge does not get taken away. It's still as shocking.
It's the reality of what happened, which is completely different to what, say, you're taught in school or you're brought up with this amazing, we went and discovered this and we done this and, we brought back this, and isn't it incredible? Like, you know what I mean? And it's a completely different side of the story. It's
God, I remember being at school and having the history lesson about the slave trade. And I remember it now. It's a double page. One page was about how awful the slave trade was, but the main story was that we were the first to end the slave trade.
Yes.
Aren't we great? that was
The
actual slavery stuff completely swept under the carpet. I hope that's different in schools now.
Yeah, I hope so as well.
But that was the standard lesson, I think, for most, certainly English kids. I won't speak for the rest of the UK.
Okay.
Yeah, very interesting. I think it would be a good time to talk about the next stage, really, which is the trading routes, for sugar and other spices as well. How were they set up? Is that still the same, approach to trading today, or has that changed?
Well, the original trade routes are the old spice roads or silk roads, as they're called. So we're talking again, going back to medieval times. All of that gets very much disrupted in the 15th and 16th centuries by the Portuguese. I mean, the Portuguese were the pioneers of all this colonization and stuff. And as well as them starting up the slave trade and going over to the New World, they were also trying to find a route to India. I mean, it's why the New World was discovered, right? They were trying to find a shortcut to the other side of India. They knew the world was round, but they didn't know there was a whole continent anyway. So they were going out, people like Columbus were going out, hoping to come round the other side and find India and get hold of the spices. That didn't happen. But yes, they went over and they just, again, usurped all the different trade routes and made an absolute huge amount of money. And then they were usurped by the English and the Dutch. And then you've got the English with their sort of West Indies sugar production, and then their East India Company, which went on for hundreds of years, just disrupted all of that. And then you've got the growing British Empire and all their colonies. They found lots of other places to grow sugar. Sugar's actually growing quite a wide band. Mm-hmm. So wherever they went, they grew sugar, harvested sugar, moved all sorts of people all around the world, to all these different colonies, and to the point where it's basically grown everywhere it can be grown. It gets extremely fractured. There's just a sugar and empire diaspora, all
it wasn't
around.
grown in Europe at that stage where it was originally, though.
No. They very much moved to the New World.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And they also went to India, grew a bit in India, New Zealand, Australia, South Africa. And that's just the British, of course. You've got the French Empire, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the Belgians. It just gets so unbelievably complicated. What you can say, and this is not hyperbole or anything, but the British Empire was built on slavery, and it was built on sugar, because sugar and slavery are so linked that they're the same thing. And even if you were, I don't know, a business in England and you had nothing to do with sugar or even food, there was maybe you were, I don't know, making nice drapes, curtains or furniture or something, or you're a stationer or a boat builder, you were getting a massive uptick in orders because people were getting rich. People
so everything fed this. Yeah.
Everything impacted.
Yeah. So its tendrils were running very deep. Historians call it the sugar slave complex, which kind of makes it sound a bit clinical, but it just meant that everybody was making money directly or indirectly, whether you liked it or not. Maybe you're just an employee, right? But everyone was making money from sugar and slavery. You couldn't get away from it.
I never knew this. And I've read quite a few history books. I quite like history books, but that's completely new to me, the sugar and slavery link, for sure.
It's hard because you can't tell somebody it in 2 minutes. You can't do a soundbite. It's impossible. Because how long have we been talking for now? Sort of 20, 25 minutes. We'll have to talk for 25 minutes to be able to get to a point where I can put it in perspective for you. Because otherwise it's unimaginable. But it's still unimaginable, really.
So then things were obviously then getting worse and worse in those situations over the years. And then did then things start to be remedied, or kind of like what happened next?
Well, by the time you get to the end of the 18th century, people are really getting wise to what's going on. And it becomes very obvious what's going on, because you've got a lot of African slaves being traded in Liverpool, London, Bristol, and people actually start seeing what's happening. A lot of African slaves end up in Britain. Sometimes they get freed, actually, but people are getting really more and more clear. And the people that we've got to thank really for opening people's eyes up are the Quakers. A sort of religious sect, essentially. But they were very anti-war, anti-slavery. And they were going over there. They weren't allowed to be MPs or they weren't allowed to be preachers or anything like that. But they were very good at influencing people. So they'd go visit the plantations and report back what was happening. You also had a lot of sort of middle-class housewives with not much to do. And they really got on board and really started making a noise, actually, and got really invested in things. They started to talk to people like William Wilberforce. He's kind of well known. He was an independent MP. He was started talking about it at the House of Commons, and very slowly did people start to change their minds. He tried to get an act through for the ending the abolition of the slave trade 14 times before it was actually...
Wow.
I mean, God bless him. I don't think I would have lasted 14 times. He just kept going and kept going. And eventually, because of his good work, and people like Josiah Wedgwood, who was, the guy who made all the porcelain, he was a big proponent of it. And eventually it just got to a point where you couldn't ignore it. So you had the Tories and the Whigs. They were the two main parties. The Tories were very much like, no, we can't have any change. And also, we're all very used to having all this money, including you, commoners. So if we got rid of the sugar trade, it would be a disaster. We'd be plunged into poverty. Luckily, no one took any notice. And the Whigs, who were kind of the sort of progressive party of the time, they were very much going on the let's get rid of slavery as their kind of their main argument. And it was a landslide victory. Not only did the act get through, but they got put into office, and very quickly it was dismantled. Well, very quickly. It took about 7 years.
Okay.
Because people realized that people still wanted sugar, so you couldn't just disappear a load of slaves and expect them to do it. And again, this is the bit that you don't hear about at school. Yes, we were the first to abolish the slave trade, and what we did was we swapped it for something else that was basically worse than slavery. Because they said, okay, well, let's have the slaves just slowly get weaned off being slaves. And what they did was they started giving them money, very small amounts of money. But then what happened was all these planters were going, well, hang on a minute, they're not slaves, so we don't have to keep them. Then we won't keep them. Off you go. And the slaves had nowhere to go. They're stuck on an island in the West Indies. Where do you go? So they said, okay, you come on back in to the fold. And this wasn't slavery because they'd, in inverted commas, chosen to be apprentices. It was this kind of apprenticeship thing. Very quickly, people got wise to that too. But then by this point, we've got the British Empire and all of its tendrils. So instead, they just started shipping people from India over to the West Indies to do the job of the slaves. They offered them these amazing sort of deals where they'd go over, they'd have their food and board paid for, and they'd be able to go back after 7 or 8 years with a load of cash in their pockets. But the reality was they didn't pay them enough for even the boat ride home. So they were stuck on the islands essentially as slaves. So they swapped one thing for another, but it was just the same stuff. It was just a different word, really. So unfortunately, the exploitation side of things it's just impossible to shake off completely, I think, because you got to either exploit people or the environment, or consumers. We're all exploited too. Sorry, I'm not depressing you, am I?
No, it's so interesting.
It is so interesting. I think it would be a good point now to perhaps move on to what the sugar industry is like now. What does it look like, in the years that we're living right now?
Yeah, and can I add a question into that, which I think you'll answer at the same time?
Yeah.
When did sugar beet become a thing? And was that introduced in order to remedy the situation, or did it happen, for another reason?
Well, sugar beet was first, or the farming of it to create sugar was a German invention because they had no sugar industry. They were sick of having to pay imports. So they came up with it. That's the sort of boring reason. But then when you had all the Napoleonic wars and disruptions to exports, imports, and things like that, the French really got into it. Mm-hmm. Napoleon put a huge amount of money into beet farming. When it comes to Britain, our main disruption was in First World War. So after the war was over, that's when all the sugar beet farms were developed. I mean, they dragged their heels a little bit and didn't quite do a decent enough job by the time we got to the Second World War. So, twice bitten, thrice shy in this case. They really went for it after the end of the Second World War. And now we can, we could, if we wanted to, probably keep ourselves in sugar without having to import any at all. Except that's not the case, of course, because we can't stop eating it. But, if we all ate it moderately, it would be a completely homegrown thing.
The word that will do.
Like self-sufficiency, isn't it? Almost
self-sufficient. That's what I was going for.
But the sugar trade now, kind of in the New World, how does that look, and is that in a much better position, or is there still potentially some problems?
There really is problems. I think the main problem,
low wage or any of that.
Yeah. So you can. Where should we start? So the environment is a big problem. To be able to grow a huge amount of sugar cheaply, you got to get rid of all that sugar. You got to get rid of all that water from the sugar juice really quickly. Otherwise, it goes all sour and turns into syrup, and it goes weird. And you've got to keep on growing. It's a grass; it just keeps on growing. You've got to chuck a load of. You don't have to, but people think that they have to throw a load of fertilizers, pesticides on these things, because it's like when you're mowing the lawn, you can cut grass off at the base, unlike most plants, and start growing again. Most plants, if you cut the head off, they're goners, aren't they?
So we now recognise there's more problems with the actual plant and the crop, as well as the staffing, if you see what I mean.
Yeah,
become more environmentally aware and monocrop, etc.
Yeah, and in Australia, where there's a lot of sugar being grown, the runoff from their sugarcane fields, that's the main reason that the coral reefs are dying because of sugar. Direct runoff from sugar plantations in Australia.
Us just talking here about this, it's packed with so much information, so much history, isn't it? Across the whole world, everyone's impacted, and even us, we're impacted by it right now.
Even to modern day,
modern day, yeah. And
for it to be cheap, they've got to make absolutely massive amounts of it.
Yeah,
absolutely massive amounts of it. So they can't stop. They can't be inefficient at any point. It's got to be maxed out. And capitalism's all about profit at any cost.
Yeah.
So as long as they're making profit, they don't care.
Yeah.
But of course, that's all catching up with us now, of course. And we are waking up to it. But I'm terrible when it comes to sugar. When I had my little restaurant for a couple of years, I would be eating old packets of donuts and stuff like that just to get through the night. Busy people make bad choices.
Interesting, yeah.
And it all goes out the window for me when I'm busy. I try to eat all properly and healthy and stuff like that. But as soon as, I'm a bit sad or I feel like I've got too much on my plate, I'm horsing those donuts in.
We feel like sugar is the answer.
But I don't know if, before we close up, because this has been such interesting conversation, honestly. But in terms of then the staffing in the New World with the plantations now, how does that look these days?
Well, it's pretty grim, in fact, for the most part.
This is not really dark history of sugar. This is dark history and present of sugar, potentially. This whole conversation.
If I had to do a history of the light history of sugar, it'd be about 2 pages long.
Wow.
We can't shake off the exploitation. People who grow it now can't imagine doing it in any other way. I think that's the problem. However, there are people who are booking the trend. So in Brazil, they're making quite a lot of organic sugar.
Okay.
they're making them next to the rainforests, mixed crops, things like that, where you can increase yields by having different plants in there. And they're increasing the genetic diversity of the plants as well, which also helps. You can buy it. You have to go to these kind of online shops, the wholesale shops and things like that. And yes, it is a bit more expensive, obviously, but it's not crazy expensive. But the problem that we've got is if we go to a supermarket, and that's where most people do have to go, there is very little choice these days. It's not being sold. Food manufacturers aren't using things like that. You do get the odd fair trade thing. But here's the thing about fair trade, right? You only have to have one ingredient in there that's fair trade for it to be called fair trade.
Oh, really?
You might have fair trade cocoa in your chocolate. But two big fingers up to the sugar guys or whatever, and the spice guys.
It's so complicated. Like, you're told something is good and then it's probably not good. It's just a very difficult. It's a difficult place to be as a peasant.
It is difficult, and that's why it's good. If you can, the biggest way you can make a difference with all of this is to cook more yourself from scratch. And I know that's a big ask, but realistically,
better for us as well, of course.
And better for us. It's better for the environment. It's better for the people growing the foods. I mean, how you approach doing that, I've got no idea. It's a huge problem, but that's the only way I can see of
growing your own food helps. Like, if you can grow, and if you have the space and time, and you can, growing your own food can definitely help. And shopping local,
grow your own sugar beet. There you go.
Try and grow your own sugar beet. Or you can replace it with like the stevia plant.
Obviously, summer plant, hasn't it?
I've grown stevia once or twice in pots on the allotment, and that's very, very sweet. Like, you have a little.
I think that kind of stuff's great in your fizzy drinks and things like that. For sure. You can't replace sugar in a cake because it does so much of the stuff sort of chemically.
But you don't use beetroot. Because beetroot is used in some cakes, isn't it, for the moisture and the sweets? So you potentially can, to a degree.
Yeah, so you can work out ways to reduce the amount of sugar, for sure. But if you're buying a cake, it's out of your control. That's the difference. And I think if somebody did make a cake, because you bake a basic Victoria sponge, so 1/4 eggs, 1/4 fat, 1/4 flour, 1/4 sugar. So I think if you
your lunch
physically made that yourself and you saw what was going in it, maybe you'd have fewer slices or a smaller slice, maybe, or maybe not.
It's good, doesn't it?
You can treat yourself every now and again, like today. I think this has been so interesting. Our listeners would most definitely be.
It easily could have been 3 hours, but we
do
have to keep our episodes at less than 40 minutes. So. Just a little bit over, but it's been amazing.
It has been amazing. Really, so your book, The Dark History of Sugar, where can listeners find that?
At all good bookshops.
Yeah,
and the big bad one too.
And you're doing the online presentation on a regular basis, or was that just a one-off when I attended that one?
Well, I wanted it to be a sort of semi-regular thing, but I haven't done one since. I've got some irons in the fire that's taking up most of my time at the minute. A couple of books that I'm working on. One of which is a history of pudding. So that was a dream come true. That doesn't feel like it at the minute.
Wow, it's been so interesting to chat to you today. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, thank you.
Really poignant moments there too. So we really appreciate you giving all those people a voice as well and letting people know what things were like and the fact that it's still not all rosy as well. It's good to have that awareness.
Yeah, it is.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Neil.
Hello. I'm recording on now so I don't forget in a minute.
I know what it's like.
How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. You may hear some slurping in the background because my dog has just decided to come in and literally drink the bowl of water, and very noisily.
Okay, that's fine with me. I can do that.
I
feel like I should be lounging half naked on a bed, though. as I know how laid back Mr. Perry normally is, and I'm your Michael for the day. So it's too cold. It's too cold.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't really laugh, but yeah, that did make me laugh. To be honest with you, I'm happy to take the break this week from lounging on the bed half naked, Michael. I'm quite happy with a week of fully dressed Michael.
That works for me. It's too cold. It's too cold.
I love that. We should probably just say, since we are recording, to our listeners that you may realise that this is a different mic. Michael and Mike have switched places. So I've got a different... Maybe you could be a stand-in for Michael Perry, Mike Palmer.
It's funny,
more
because
often.
I am a Michael at home. Everybody calls me Michael apart from at work.
Really? So are you a Mike? What do you prefer, Michael or Mike?
Well, it's strange because I prefer Michael, but because now everybody knows me as Mike, the gardener, it's difficult to try and turn that tide. So I roll with both, but I'm a Michael to everybody else.
All right, we're going to have you as Michael this week because you are Michael after all, and you are standing in for Michael Perry, who also prefers Michael and not Mike. So there you go. Maybe all Michaels are the same.
Yeah, we're a little bit fussy about that cool bit.
We should say that poor Michael Perry, Mr. Plant Geek, is a little bit poorly at the moment. He's taking a break, a much needed break, I would say, putting his feet up, resting his voice, and recuperating from the comfort of his bed, probably still half naked though.
Well, yeah, get well soon. Let's leave it at that.
Yeah, let's leave it at that. Get well soon to you. But he will hopefully be absolutely fine. And in the meantime, Mike the gardener, Michael Palmer, is here for the Horti Hangout. And, I tend to come into these horticultural gossips with absolutely no thought about what we're going to discuss, because it's not an interview. It's just a what's going on with you at the moment type of thing. So tell us about your week. What have you been up to?
My week. Well, every other Wednesday, I go gardening with a friend. And for me, that's how I started out. I started out as a professional gardener and garden designer. But since lockdown, I've pretty much stopped the gardening part, apart from every other Wednesday when I go out with Otis the gardener. And on a Tuesday morning, I spend an hour with my partner, Peter, gardening at a friend's house. So that was my week. That was yesterday, out gardening for the day. And I love that. It's where all of our material comes from, being out in the garden, gardening in my own garden. Yeah, so that was this week so far. And now I'm rushing to meet a deadline for my column in amateur gardening, which needs to be finished tomorrow. So I'm largely there.
It's almost there, apart from this blip where you're coming to chat with me.
But, sometimes sort of like, you know what it's like when you're writing. Sometimes you look at the screen and the old grey matter's whirring round, but the words aren't coming out perhaps as you want them to. So
definitely.
It's a very, very welcome distraction. So thank you.
It's a pleasure. Two things that you just said there. Like it's super interesting actually how you said you garden like on a Tuesday with Peter and then on a Wednesday with Otis. I hope I've got those days the right way around. And how I think certainly in our world, what we do, we do more media and writing and content than we do actual gardening now. And so I literally have to pull myself away and go, no, I'm not doing anything on the screen today. At my core are plants. I'm going to the garden no matter what, and I'm going to get out there and get my hands dirty. It's so important to remember that, isn't it?
Well, I'm glad you said it, because as a podcaster as well, I speak to people like you and Michael, and there's always that sort of tussle. How much time can you get to spend in the garden doing what we love, as opposed to in the media side? And one feeds the other, but the other is so all-consuming at times. So yeah, I love having this conversation now. It's important for your own sanity to know that it's not just you struggling with conflict between I want to be outside, I want to write, I want to podcast, or do whatever.
100% agree with you. Like, it's so nice that we love plants so much that we want to talk about them, we want to podcast, we want to write about them, we want to encourage other people to do it. But at the end of the day, we've still got to do it for our own well-being, you know. And also, the other day, Mike, I was drawing up like a landscape plan, a really small little landscape plan, and I could not remember the name of a plant, right? And I, you know, like talking of grey matter, like literally like could not think of it. Not even enough that I could have Googled anything to match. You know what I mean? I was like, I could not remember it. And then I was thinking to myself back maybe 10 years ago or so, when I was still working in private clients' gardens and designing, and I would, like, all the names would have come, like boom, 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 boom. When you are not actually physically out there working with the plants, it does change, doesn't it? Do you know what I mean? It's like, I really needed to remember that plant. I got there in the end, but it just kind of brought home again to me how important it is to still be doing the work, not just writing about it, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I was gardening professionally, as you say, those names were just there because you were working with them day in, day out, season long. I do a live on Instagram most Sundays, the Sunday Stroll, and it's awful sometimes when I go to a plant and I'm led up to this plant, and then it's like, what's it called?
Yeah.
I have to say, I'm having a senior moment, and I hear myself saying that far too often these days.
Yeah, I'm with you. I totally get that. And the other thing was your amateur gardening magazine. You write a column in that now, don't you? Tell us all about that.
Yeah, I'm currently writing for the middle of April. So, but the strange thing was, I joined the Garden Media Guild 4 years ago to write, but then literally months later, we went into lockdown, and I remember they were saying, share your gardens on social media. I'd seen a couple of people do a live on Instagram, and I thought, I can do that. So I went on to social media the first Friday in lockdown, went live, stumbled around the garden with my phone in landscape rather than portrait, with our Mr. Perry being one of the 6 people who were watching saying, turn your phone round. And I've done that sort of like, well, we're coming up to 4 years now. So I didn't do the writing thing that I joined the guild for because I became known on social media, but I was a writer. So to be given the gig with Amateur Gardening, with lovely Kim Stoddart, the editor, it's a dream come true because I love writing.
Yeah, and getting word out there about the plants and what you do and gardening tips and advice. Can you give us a hint of what you're writing about for your next column?
Yeah, I'm actually writing about scintillating shrubs. So shrubs that provide more than one season of interest. Now, I'm a perennial guy. I love my flowers, love my perennials. So for me, I do need shrubs in the garden to provide that structure, that maturity, the textures, but they've got to earn their keep. They've got to do more than just flower once and then fizzle away. So I'm looking for shrubs that will provide lots of interest throughout the season. Okay,
I'm going to just talk to you about shrubs now because you've literally just hit a nerve. So we're going to talk shrubs, Mike. If Michael, I don't know what to say now.
Either or.
We just moved house in the US. We moved in October, and I've talked about this in the gossip before, so I'm just going to follow it up with, we have a homeowners association in our neighbourhood, and generally homeowners associations are very helpful because they help to get, say, like dog poop bins put in place and always dog poop bags around, and if there's any neighbourhood issues they get sorted. So largely they can be very helpful, but they're extremely restrictive and controlling. And in our front garden I removed some old tatty shrubs that really gave no benefit to anyone. It's a very deep, shady area. And I replaced it with very specific plants for deep shade. And we also have very heavy clay soil here. So I mulched the beds. They're mulched over the top again with like pine needles. So I removed all of those because they like things to look nice and neat and tidy. Fine. I mean, I'm not a tidy gardener, but we'll go with that. But I removed these shrubs, which were generally rubbish. And then I put in things like I put heucheras in. I've got like toad lilies in, those beautiful, beautiful flowers. Some astilbes. I've got lily of the valley. I've got to think what else I've got now. Hostas, other things. Anyway, Solomon's seal, polygonata. Yeah. Right, yeah, all of them. Anyway, so it's going to look super pretty. And then I put the pine needles back around them. So it was all nice and neat and tidy. Get me? And then I got a letter saying I was violating the rules and that I was not allowed to do that. So as you can imagine, this has been the source of great stress and anger a little. And I have probably used quite a few words that you would not expect to leave my mouth, but they have.
I can't believe it. I can.
Yeah, I know you can. And yeah, quite a few emails back and forwards. And I'm not removing those plants because it's my property and my garden. So we're in a bit of a thing about that at the moment. And talking, the point going with this, like if people are watching my stories, you will see everything that's going on, like emails and all sorts, because it's absolutely ridiculous. They sent me the letter in winter and said, you can't plant these because they're not flowering. They're like flowering perennials, but it's winter in deep shade also. Kind of like, what are you thinking here? Anyway, besides the point, you are right. These shrubs, which are not great quality at all, they're evergreens, but there's nothing going on with them other than plain like utility planting shrubs. Don't give anything. They're not allowed to get big, so there's no room for like nesting, for example. They're not particularly beneficial. I know having some greenery is better than not having any, but like you were saying, you want them to work for you. Like if you've got shrubs, you want them to be useful, right? You want them to look nice, you want them to flower, you want them to be beneficial to pollinators, all of those kind of things. These aren't. And so, well, I know there's always some benefit, but you get my point. So like I actually did keep some, but some went, and that's where I planted. So do you have some useful shrubs or scintillating shrubs that you could recommend to listeners, perhaps if they're in that situation where they do want to plant some useful shrubs in their garden?
Yeah, I mean, are you looking, let's take your situation. You've got this shady corner with clay soil. So first and foremost, you've got Fatsia, and there's a lovely Fatsia spider's web, and it has green foliage, but with this white spider web tracing on the top.
Yes,
and in a dark, shady corner. I defy whoever's written you those emails not to like Fatsia spider's web. You point them in the direction, I'll have a word. And then again for shade, Skimmia. You've got Skimmia rubella or fragrant cloud. Cloud even, not crowd. Beautiful. The scent this time of year. Yeah. So that's shade covered. But for me, looking for shrubs that sort of like tick more than one box, one of my favourites has to be Cornus Kusa, China Girl. And there's Milky Way. There's a few of them. Beautiful creamy white bracts in spring. Then when the flowers fade and the bracts go on for weeks and weeks, the small flowers form a fruit which turn pinky red. So you've got that in the autumn as well. And then the foliage changes colour. That's what I want it to sort of like perform and again and again, so that I get a long season of interest. I don't want to lob a blancmange in my border once it's finished flowering, and that's a couple of weeks worth. It's like, no one wants that, do they?
I love that. Blah, 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 munch. That's great. It sounds like we should be on a game show. Scintillating shrubs. Blah, 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 munch. The gardening game show. I love that. It's true. Here in the south where I am at the moment, I'm back in the UK in just a couple of weeks, but in springtime here, cornices everywhere. Like they're used all around. They grow so well. There's quite a lot of shade around where we are, tree shade mainly. It's a city of trees where we are. So there's quite a lot. And you're right. The bracts, or what look like the flowers, are just so beautiful. Like lovely. Yeah. Nice and pinks, and like you said, even the fruits, they look super cool, don't they, as well? So I love them.
Like little Christmas decorations because the fruits stand upward, so it's like a Christmas tree that's been inverted. It's just it has to be my favourite. And the column that I'm writing today and for tomorrow, that's my favourite. And I say this is my favourite. I've saved the best till last.
I love that. That's lovely. Tell us a little bit. You mentioned the Garden Media Guild because you are chair of Garden Media Guild, aren't you?
I'm co-chair now. This is my last 6 months or so. Garden Media Guild is an organisation for the likes of us who podcast, write. Mr. Titchmarsh and Mrs. Klein are two of our patrons alongside Gordon Ray and Roy Lancaster. And it's for anybody involved with garden media, photographers, podcasters, writers, social media influencers. And it's a place where we can all get together. We can share best practice. We have chat groups. We have get-togethers via Zoom to talk to each other, find out what we're doing, share problems. And plus, if you're new to social media, if you're thinking about going into garden media, you can join as a probationary member, and we'll assign you a full member who can mentor you and show you the ropes and sort of help to kickstart your career. It's a wonderful organisation. I've been proud to be chair and now co-chair, and I will miss it when I step down at the end of August. It will be, the end of a very, very exciting era.
You've been there for a few years, actually, haven't you? Made quite a few changes.
Yeah, it will be 3 years, and we have made some changes. And I think when I first came on board, I wasn't prepared just to caretake it. I wanted to try and make it better for our members, for everybody, and to try and sort of like sing out loud about the Garden Media Guild. And 3 years has gone by too quickly.
Oh, and you're
getting old, isn't it?
Gosh, when did we first meet? I mean, hold on. The dog's having something to say. This is very rude of you to interrupt. Apologies.
Apologies needed. We first met face to face at the Garden Media Guild 2-3 years ago.
Yeah.
But we went back a little bit further with garden tags.
Garden tags, of course.
Remember that? The garden tags days.
There was a garden tags app. I think it's still around, but I don't see it. All right, okay. And we both used to post on there, and then we'd do some how-to videos for them. And that's how we that was quite a long time ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, let's not go into the number.
Oh, yeah. Okay, let's move on. I've gone grey because of it. That's how long ago. I've gone grey since then.
We first met at the Garden Press event, and I think that was 2 or 3 years ago.
Right, yeah. Yeah, okay, so this is the garden gossip, Mike. So that means, as a guest, you've got to give us some gossip.
About
anything you like.
Can I gossip about something I'm doing this year?
Absolutely, you gossip about anything you like. It's a freewheeling.
I'm gonna gossip about the Board Hill Garden Festival on the 22nd and 23rd of June.
Yeah,
it's their first garden festival, the first time they've done it. There's going to be 40 stalls with plants and furniture and food, rare and unusual plants, live music, chats, and I'm going to be the host in the chat area, in the chat theatre. There's going to be stuff for the kiddies to do. There's going to be glorious weather, hopefully by the middle of June. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to that.
That sounds amazing.
We've got Joe Thompson, Manoj Molde, Ginny Blom, Tom Hartdyke, amongst others, coming to give chats and talks. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. And there'll be a lot of gossip backstage, obviously.
Well, you have to wear a microphone. You could be a roving reporter and get the gossip from backstage.
I'll have one of those sort of like sneaky mics under my lapel and just like chat to people and find out exactly what's going on. What's the lowdown in the garden media world?
The horticultural sleuth that you will be for us.
Yeah. I should go undercover. I'm trying to think who famous goes undercover and does that sort of thing. I don't really watch a lot of TV, really, do you?
No, not at all. So many people say, did you see that or did you watch that? I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't watch TV really at all. I never just turn the TV on. Like sometimes we watch series, like a Netflix series or something. Honestly, I've got to be very honest. Sometimes there's a lot of sport on in our house. Not in the day, it's literally banned. But in the evening, my husband will watch sport. But that's fine because I just sit and read. But we just very rarely put on whatever's going on TV. Like I have no idea.
Same here. I mean, in the winter, I'm more inclined to maybe sit and watch something of an evening. But I'm at the point now where I'm itching to get outside. And because the evenings are just beginning to draw out, I will force myself to stay out there until sort of like 6:30. And then when your hands are numb and you can no longer feel anything, it's time to come inside.
That's when you know it's time.
Yeah, reluctantly, I think, oh, that's it. I can't.
I can't wait for those days, Mike. I can't wait to get back down my allotment and I get there sometimes at 5:30, 6 in the morning when it's light in the morning, that is. And I could be there all day. I have my lunch down there and I just hang out down there doing things and then come home whenever I'm getting ready. Oh, those are the best days, aren't they?
Well, I dragged the garden furniture out from around the side of the house at the weekend because I thought it's not happening, but I'm just going to make it happen. Perhaps if garden furniture is sat out there, whoever's in charge of weather will look down and think, oh yeah, we ought to get a move on. We ought to move this rain and cold weather on and put spring on.
I like that. Move it on and put spring on. If only you could press a button, right? Like, you know, you're podcasting off and on. Stop rain, start spring. That would be great, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Do you know, someone up there has obviously just fallen asleep and forgotten and just...
Mother Nature's a bit of snooze.
If only it were that simple to press a button.
If only. You also mentioned Manoj, and I want to just give him a shout out, if that's good with you, while we're chatting, because Manoj came on a few weeks ago to talk about his new book, and it's due out like now, just about now. So I promised to give him a shout out. It's called Your Outdoor Room: How to Design a Garden You Can Live In, and it's going to be full of beautiful colour, as you would expect from Manoj, and just how you can create a space that's not only colourful but useful for you to sit and enjoy and entertain. Has Mike got the book? I'm like,
and I thought I had it in here because I too spoke to Manoj and he sent me a copy of this beautifully colourful book. So good luck to Manoj with his book. Or some gossip, actually, if you want some gossip. I actually helped Manoj build the garden at Chelsea Flower Show last year.
The one he got married in?
The very same. And, well, gossip, if you want gossip. Who was stood on the sidelines blubbing in front of the national press?
You!
Yes. Well, and I certainly wasn't the only one. It was such a joy to sort of have worked on the garden and to have seen the excitement of everybody on that team. And everybody sort of says, oh, this is a teamwork. And we all got on, we all had a great laugh. But we all knew that Manoj was going to get married on this garden at Press Day. And it was just overwhelming to sort of see him all dressed up with his husband, Clive, and the guests, and James Alexander Sinclair officiated. What's the word? He was the... what's the word when you can oversee an event like that?
I think like officiate is the right word, no?
Yeah, it's the word, but he you're called something when you can do that, when you can officiate over a wedding.
Wow. Excuse me, don't bark at me. Sorry. Yes.
So yeah, it was just amazing to sort of see behind the scenes and see the incredible detail and work that goes into actually building a show garden at Chelsea.
What a wonderful experience to have.
Yeah.
You know, I can remember coming into Chelsea on that day and standing at the side, because obviously the wedding was about to take place. And I was like, it ran late. Yeah, it started late. And I was like, why is it late? Who's being late? Because there's always someone that shows up to a wedding late, right? I was like, who's late? And then I think it started like a good half an hour or longer later, but I could not move because I really wanted to see it. Like I wanted to experience, you know, something that's actually made history, really. You know, it's never been done at the Chelsea Flower Show before. The press were there and it was just absolutely beautiful to see. So like for you to be able to also, you know, help create that garden, that's incredible. I don't blame you for standing on the sidelines blubbing.
I have to say, I am a bit of a blubber. You know, it's embarrassing. We go to a show and I'll be the one that's sort of like streaming and I can't look either way. I have to look straight ahead because the people either side of me must think, my goodness me, this grown man is in tears. I'm just an emotional kind of guy, I guess.
There's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong.
Absolutely not.
Let it out. Absolutely, let it out. Okay, well, anyone listening, that's your outdoor room, How to Design a Garden You Can Live In by Manoj Maldi. Go take a look at that. That's available, I think, UK and USA and probably elsewhere also. And it is genuinely a really lovely book. Okay, so I think that leaves us now with where can listeners find you if they are not already following you online?
They can find me on Instagram, where I am Mike_the Gardener. They can find me in Amateur Gardening Magazine with my fortnightly column there. And where else can they find me? On my podcast, the Mike the Gardener Gardening Podcast. And like you, I love chatting to authors, plant men and women, photographers, anybody who's involved with this wonderful world of gardening. And I'm on Series 7 at the moment, so you can find me on Spotify, Google, and wherever else you get your podcast from.
So that's Mike the Gardener, not Michael the Gardener. Remember that, everyone.
Yes, definitely. With my work persona as Mike the Gardener.
Okay, thank you so much for joining me for our gossip for this week's episode. And I think we both just wishing Michael Perry get well soon vibes. We'll send him all of the good get well energy soon, and I'm sure he'll be back on gossiping very soon over the coming weeks. But in the meantime, thank you so much, Mike the Gardener, for being here. Hooray! Thank you.
Thanks very much.
The tranquil, soothing, natural sound of flowing water. Listening to it has been shown to lower your heart rate and blood pressure and gently relax your whole body. Combining the magical sound of cascading water with the beauty of plants, Hydria Life now enable you to enjoy these same health and well-being benefits at home or in the garden. Get 10% off their rechargeable Hydria fountain at hydrialife.com when you quote code PLANT24 on ordering. That's PLANT24 on ordering.
The music for the Plant-Based podcast is part of the song Grow by Mikey James, and our editor is Gareth Patch of Semi Echo.